Welcome to the Disruptive Social Care Podcast with social care provocateur and social media queen Shirley Ayres and myself, Stuart Arnott, founder of Mindings, a service dedicated to bringing social media to the disconnected. In this weekly show, we aim to spread the word about what's going on in the world of disruptive social care, amplify the voices of people with great ideas that few people ever hear about, and to help our communities connect and collaborate. So I said they're weekly. I hope people notice that, because for the next few weeks we're going to have a weekly podcast. So turnabout, we're going to do news one week and an interview the next week. So this week, a very warm welcome to Paul Hodgkin, who's the CEO of Patient Opinion. And I'll hand over to Shirley.
Thank you, Stu. Delighted that we've got Paul here with us today, because Patient Opinion, I think, have a very special place in my heart. And partly it's because in most markets, consumers drive up standards because they can vote with their feet. And one of the reasons why it has been so difficult to improve the quality of healthcare in the NHS is that sanction has been missing. We have a government promoting choice by giving people the right to decide amongst different hospitals, different treatments, where their doctor refers them. But a critical issue for a lot of people is, how do patients make a choice? Paul, as Stuart said, is the Chief Executive of Patient Opinion, which was founded in 2005 and has grown to be the UK's leading independent non-profit feedback platform for health services. Paul has an interesting background. He was a GP and he's run several other social enterprises in the past. His eureka moment about Patient Opinion came in 2004 when he was working with young people with learning difficulties who were selling coffee as part of a previous social enterprise. He realised that they were much better at selling than he was, and wondered under what other circumstances the experience of distress and disability could become a competitive advantage. And out of this came Patient Opinion, a site designed to help collectivise the wisdom of patients, carers and staff by sharing their stories in a safe, structured, public place, designed to be useful for busy staff as well as the public. Over 450 organisations subscribe or are registered with Patient Opinion, which is a pretty impressive number. And the public conversations on Patient Opinion are directed to just the right people locally who are responsible for that aspect of a relevant service. And interestingly, around 45% of all the stories are thank yous, and around 10% result in a service improvement. The aim for Patient Opinion is to host upwards of 100,000 stories a year. And as Paul says, if 10% of these get acted upon, that's 10,000 improvements. I like that. So, Paul, what have been the biggest challenges in developing Patient Opinion?
Well, first of all, it's really nice to be here, Shirley. I think for the biggest challenge was, first of all, understanding what business we were in, how we could use all these fabulous new tools of social media and create something that embodied the values of mutuality, support and care that are at the heart of the NHS and the social care system, and also gave us the freedom to be independent, to be financially independent, and to provide a structured, safe place where people could have those conversations. You were talking about choice, and clearly choice is really important to people and yes, a major bit of Patient Opinion. But in our view, after 7 years, it's not the most important bit. The most important bit is people telling their own stories. We've always made sense as a species of threatening disease and death and illness through telling stories to each other. And now you can do that on the web, and now you can do that in ways that actually help the busy staff who are looking after your mum, who looked after you last week. And that's what's transformative, doing that in public so that they can hear, and you can tell your brother who lives in Aberdeen that you've done something about mum's care in Birmingham. That's really what these tools give. And we've been working out, we don't have all the answers by any manner or means, working out how to get the stories to the right people, how to motivate busy staff, how to encourage people to tell their own stories, because telling the story of your colonoscopy online is not the same as posting pictures of your holidays in South Wales online on Flickr. It's a different ask.
I think the issue of security and people feeling safe is very important, and I think also people wanting a response. Certainly the recent sort of discussions I've seen on Twitter about what is more important, choice or good quality care, and the majority of people say, well, actually, what I'd like is good quality care, and I want to know where to find it. You've got over 450 organisations signed up. What is the potential market for patient opinion? How many more organisations should really be signed up to patient opinion?
It's a really interesting question. I was thinking a couple of weeks back about what the total market in health is. And if you, across the UK, because we cover the whole of the UK, and I came to about 4,500. So we're about 10% now. Clearly, some are more important to people and having in the conversation, like trusts and mental health trusts, ambulance trusts, a lot of the bigger third sector providers. Than others. But every voice is important. Every voice matters. And the little strap line on patient opinion, every voice matters. When we started with that, we thought we were talking about the people out there, public patients, carers, families, service users, and they are really important. But actually we came to realise that every voice, and that includes staff, every voice, if you want conversations that improve things, which is fundamentally what we're about, every voice, the porter, the consultant, the administrator, the manager, the CEO of those providers, every voice matters. So you have to engage with them and give them some reason to engage. Now, currently, of those 450 organisations, as you were saying, what people want is a response. Yeah. We get a response from organisations who are registered or subscribe about 65% of the time, which is good.
Yeah.
But often they are responses. Sometimes they're great responses. Quite often they're cut and paste responses, which are literally worse than useless. Yep. If you've gone to the trouble to tell your story, which can be quite distressing and have quite a lot of personal stuff in it and take quite a lot of courage, and you get please contact PALS, patient advice and liaison, it's going to really not endear you to the trust.
Yes. So more education required and more trusts to sign up, so we get an even better service provided by patient opinion. And another interesting development, really, patient opinion have been awarded a grant to develop care opinion. How's this progressing as a project?
It's really, really interesting. It's led by Jasmine Ali, who, unlike me, I was a GP and I understand a bit about social care, but like all GPs, I don't understand very much about social care. Jasmine leads it with a strong background in social care. It's going very well in terms of, because we understand how to construct safe conversations for health. Now, clearly, social care is a very different marketplace, and I think, for instance, on patient opinion, we have to remove one swear word every 3,000 stories, a vanishingly small number of people. Now, I suspect that may be different in social care. It may not be, but it may be. And that, I think, it's a different market. So we need to be thinking about how we do that differently. And one of the tensions in providing platforms like patient opinion is, on the one hand, the right of people to say what they feel and to do that in a safe way. And that's particularly hard in something like a care home where your mum's there, it's her home, and she's very vulnerable. So on the one hand is allowing people to say what they want. And on the other is protecting what I see as a significant issue around providers, particularly small providers, who can be feel absolutely terrible about being slagged off in public on the web. And so we have to balance those two things. The internet, just by historical happenstance, happens to have arrived at a place where the free speech end of that spectrum is predominant, which has some really good things about it. But actually, if you think about a small care home provider or somebody running 3 care assistants up in the northeast in Gateshead, who suddenly finds themselves being lambasted publicly, it can be devastating commercially, but it can also be devastating personally. And when I started Patient Opinion, the worst thing I could imagine happening was that somebody in the million-strong workforce of the NHS would commit suicide as a result of a story that we'd published. And those two things have to be balanced, I think. And I think that's what we're working out in Care Opinion, how to do that well, so that providers have some say and control, but not in any sense completely. The providers are incentivized to publish stories, and any unpublished stories are shared, so nothing that is said doesn't get dealt with. But actually, if a posting is completely malicious or inappropriate to deal with in public, there is a way of doing that that's worked into the fabric of the platform.
I think the moderation is very important. But I suppose, one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, please help me find a good care home for my parent. And with all the information out there is a real difficulty in determining this is what is right, and I would feel comfortable my parent being there. So I think Care Opinion is going to be an incredibly useful addition to people finding the right care. And interesting to talk about the challenges, because I know you ran a pilot first before launching Care Opinion. And I think, one of the things that sort of struck me is that, of course, with a lot of care homes are very small. And as you rightly say, getting that balance between people being able to tell their stories and not feeling that someone is going to be vulnerable for having expressed a negative opinion is so important. So what do you think will make Care Opinion different from the care comparison and feedback sites that are currently available?
I think the current sites, by and large, do a great job around rating. Rate cleanliness, rate, facilities. We don't do that. What we do and what we're really interested in is people's stories, in their free text, unstructured stories about what being in Green Glades Care Home is like, or what it's like using some other facility in your local locality. And so the challenges about that are that people can say anything. And so you have to have a moderation that's sensible, and you have to use those stories in ways that do not threaten staff too much, because if the ultimate aim of this is to improve services, which it is, both in health and social care, you have to have that staff engagement.
Absolutely.
If they just feel beaten up in public, they'll run a mile.
Of course.
So the challenge is getting that balance right, and the challenge is also getting people to engage, because there are an awful lot of any qualified providers out there in the social care field. And I can imagine one of the first problems that all these sites have, and I'm sure we won't be any different, is you've got a lovely site and there's no stories, there's no responses, and there's no ratings. So how do we generate that and generate content? And I think being linked to patient opinion is also very helpful in that way, because you can tell stories that cover both health and social care. So you will be able to start off on Care Opinion and say, my mum was in a care home and they didn't look after her. They did look after her. She fell over and broke her leg, and she went into the Royal Free, and then she came out to a step-down facility, and then she came back to her home. And we will send those stories to the right people in health, and we'll send them to the right people in social care in your localities. So there's a big payoff to people to integrating that. And that is, of course, it's people's stories that integrate health and social care. The professionals have gone on for years about integrating this stuff, but lo and behold, we still have silos. The things that threads back and forth are people's stories. They're stories of what happened when they went from X to Y and then back again.
Yes.
Can you tell me, as a producer and a developer, what's the mechanism? How does it work? How does somebody log on there? Can they do it anonymously? How does the feedback mechanism happen? Do you intervene? Do you nudge them to give feedback? Talk us through how the mechanism of patient opinion works.
So anybody could log on and go and look on the site and search it for free, and you'll find there's something like 48,000 services on patient opinion across the health service across the UK. You tell your story. You have to give an email address and a postcode. The postcode will tell us where you're talking about, so the system will then look. If you say, my mum was in a care home and then went into A&E and then was found to have heart failure, it'll look for those services in Bradford and say which ones were you on, and you can tick them. So the story gets tagged to the right providers, and that could be any number of providers. We then moderate it. Okay, so we moderate everything, and we publish on patient opinion 97% of what we get. 45%, as you said, Shirley, are people saying thank you, about 5% are seriously critical. We then publish it, and the tags on the story direct that story, the idea is anyway, to just the right people in Bradford or in Bideford or wherever. And that depends on them having registered. Registration is free. Anybody with legitimate interest, Health Watch, patient organisations, service user organisations, providers, the DH, the commissioning board, can register for free and get alerted, and that allows them to join the conversation, respond, and also log changes that they've made as a result. And those stories go out, so anybody logged in to register on patient opinion will get email alerts about stories relevant to them. And if their organisation has given them the right to respond, they can respond. It may just be they want to be alerted, but they can't respond. And then the responses come back in, and the author gets an email alert every time somebody responds to her. So she can then come back and say, well, that's great, but actually I was in your department last week and it's still a problem. Or it was really great, fantastic, you've made a difference here. So they are structured public conversations. And when somebody makes a service change, they log that, click it thing, and the counter goes up for them. And later this year we'll be allowing the public to vote on whether they think those service improvements are real service improvements.
Wow.
And is it free to use? How is the site funded?
It's free to use. It's funded by people who want more than just registration gives you, so people who subscribe. So a subscriber would get unlimited numbers of people, not just the 2 that you get with registration, 2 members of staff for registration, unlimited numbers. So for a big trust, we've got trusts who've got 300 or 400 staff on the system. They get reports, they get WebEx training from us about how to respond, they get somebody at the end of the phone during working hours to say, we've had this really difficult posting, how do you suggest we respond to it? And we'll say, well, why don't you look at this one? It's a very similar case and this is how they dealt with it. So there's that's how we generate income to cover our costs, because we are truly a not-for-profit.
That's great, particularly the last one, because that almost makes you crisis management, takes you into that consultancy territory.
It does, and it's really interesting watching staff change, because often they'll come in and they'll think, oh my God, it's really great to get all the thank yous, but oh my God, there's somebody said something terrible about us, and they think the sky is going to fall in. But actually, when you help them through that to write a really great response, they feel better about it, and that response will do them, we know from our research, more good than all the corporate flim-flam that comms departments give out. When you're saying, people want to choose, I think what patient opinion and care opinion will give when it's running, what people judge it on is not, I think they judge half on the story. What has this person said about this care facility? And they judge the other half on the response, because
absolutely.
The story is, well, maybe Tom 252, who's written this, was having a bad day, or maybe he's a bit odd. But this is from you, Shirley. You're the provider here. This is from the horse's mouth. So how people respond is really important, and that in turn changes them because it's public. That's why it's a system-wide driver to improve quality, as much as the kind of market force choice level stuff, which this government is really into, and I can quite see the benefit of. But actually, it's about, I've got to respond here publicly, and my professional credibility is on the line, so I'm going to do this as well as I can. And then you think, well, why don't I do this all the time?
And so if you see a poorly written or a cut and paste response, do you sometimes step in and say that wasn't really the best way to have handled that?
It depends on our relationship with them. If we have a good relationship with them and they're subscribers and we know about that, we'll say that, how about doing it this way? And obviously we don't try and change the sense of what it is, but completely understandably, certainly in the NHS, and lots of people who are tasked in the NHS to do this stuff do it in an NHS-y kind of a way, which carries absolutely no credibility I wouldn't believe it if I read it, even though we know that they may have gone through a lot of work to get there within the unit, within the team. The way they write it, just looks like, oh, no one's going to believe this. So we're going to say, well, why don't you, instead of saying that, say, really great to hear from you, Tom 252. Really sorry we didn't do this last time. What we've done is this, and this. Let me know if this doesn't work. Sign Mary with a photograph, because she can put a photograph up. Charge nurse in charge of Ward 56 in Warrington. So it's about making that human conversation that you and I know is what makes the web so appealing and interactive.
It's about feeling that somebody's taking personal ownership of your problem rather than responding in some kind of clearly cut and pasted, kind of bizarre legalese type of talk. But if you really feel it's an individual who's taken it on board and
absolutely, that is absolutely right, and that's a big learning curve. You know, we're not there, and you'll go on patient opinion, you'll see no response or really bizarre, poor responses. But I think the public nature of this will drive us up, and I'm really hopeful that in 3, 4, 5 years we'll have some really great responses that won't just be kind of corporate monospeak, but will be from the heart of the people running those services on the front line, because they want to be able to say what they're doing better.
And can people rate the responses? Like, you know, like on newspaper websites and on YouTube, you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down about how...
Later this year.
Oh, that's great. That's brilliant.
When is Care Opinion due for launch?
In early 13.
Right.
January, February. There's obviously the new portal at the NHS has lots of time schedules in there about when it wants to go live, and we're trying to fit in with that so that we meet those. So I think it will. I'm fairly confident that it'll, because of those pressures on us, we'll meet those deadlines.
Well, an interesting development for 2013. Now, interesting, of course, attitudes towards technology are beginning to change amongst both service users and staff. And of course, this is the Disruptive Social Care podcast. What do you think, Paul, that disruptive technology can contribute to health and social care?
Oh, I think what's happening, what has happened already, is that because of the web, we've all become nodes on the web. We've all got a public voice. We've all got the information that previously was limited to elites. We can find people like me at the drop of a hat. The cost of doing all those things. If you think about 20 years, the cost of having a public voice meant you had to get a letter in a newspaper. Now you've got a tweet, blog, Facebook. Everybody's got that. So that is the transformation to a world of networked individualism, which has already happened.
Yes.
You and I know that. Anybody listening to this knows that because they use Facebook, they use Twitter, they blog, they have that facility. They can find out anything on Wikipedia. What hasn't happened is that those big hierarchical corporate organizations, which includes the NHS, but also includes BT and Nike and Microsoft, are finding it terribly difficult to catch up with that. So that's the fundamental disruption. And if you think about something like telemedicine, okay, telemedicine is about us in this big citadel giving you, Shirley, a box. We were talking about this before, Stuart. That will then do stuff for you, whatever it is. So that's the old kind of way of doing it. If you look at something like patients like me, who have an online community of 29,000 people with MS, for instance, that I was just looking at, and those people with MS are saying what their main symptoms are, what treatments suit them or not, and that's just arrived. It's not controlled by clinicians. It's not controlled. It's just a community across the web, and that's the disruption, and that's why I think your podcasts are really great and really important, because the big hierarchical organizations don't get it, but everybody else does.
Yes.
And so bridging that gap somehow is really, really important.
Yes.
And social media technologies like Facebook and Twitter are enabling a lot of that disruption. If you just see somebody gets a snooty response back from their bank or something, that gets scanned in, it gets put up on Facebook, and the next thing is several million people have shared it amongst their friends. The converse of that, of course, is something like the Sainsbury's Tiger Bread. Remember that?
Oh, yes, yes.
Where some nice individual person sent a almost handwritten personal letter back to this kid. And what happened? It was scanned in, put in Facebook, millions of people shared it. They're on BBC Breakfast News the next day. and I do believe there was probably still a little bit of PR machinations behind that, but I do believe there was sincerity behind that originally, and that was because an individual was empowered to write an individual letter back instead of, if you ever receive a letter, here's a standard response. That was an individual was empowered, and I think that's the key, is empowering individuals and organisations and tell them, send a personal letter. Sometimes it won't work, sometimes it'll screw up, sometimes we'll be able to see, we'll face that. but the most important thing is that you're empowered to respond.
I think that's a really interesting point, Stuart. And if you think about those Martha Payne, the 9-year-old who held
Never seconds. Oh, yes.
Argyll and Bute Council to account, there's something kind of arbitrary about them. They're great, but they're like suddenly something tips and it goes off the scale. And it's a bit weird. So I think you're right. It's much more about the everyday routine stuff. An example of patient opinion is we've at Sheffield Teaching Hospital, which is, because we're based in Sheffield, has a large number of stories on our site. Those stories have been viewed over 4 million times.
Wow.
Now, Sheffield Teaching Hospital doesn't really respond in that way, but that I think that's unmet need. That's a definition of unmet need. It's people looking to see what these people like. And it's so yes, the Martha Payne moments are really interesting and intriguing and quite fun and pretty scary, especially if you're on the other end of them, like Waitrose has just been this week.
Oh, yes.
But I don't think they're the point. The point is to have a shimmering 100,000, 200,000 conversations that shimmer over the NHS, going to just the right staff, creating tens of thousands of service improvements at almost no cost. That's the prize.
The Waitrose story is particularly funny for people who don't know about that. I'm assuming you're referring to what's it called, Waitrose Answers or Waitrose something, and basically so that some silly PR person started off I like Waitrose because I like Waitrose because you don't have to mingle with the riffraff. And I mean, that was hilarious. That's where it went completely wrong.
I think just sort of coming on the assistive technology front, of course, I don't want a black box. I want mindings.
Yes, exactly. And I think I was just talking to Stuart before about mindings and thinking this is a classic example arising out of the public, not out of the service side. And intrinsically, that's going to be more interesting. If you think that every household in Britain over the last 10 years has spent £300 on phones, broadband, PCs, not very much, £300 per household, you get to 75 billion spent over the last 10 years by us to have iPads and phones and mobiles and all that sort of stuff. And that infrastructure is much bigger than the 10 billion that the NHS spent on not getting it connecting for health, over the same decade. And you just suddenly realise why mindings and things coming out of that 75 billion are likely to be more disruptive than black boxes coming out of the 10 billion.
Yes.
It just stands to reason. Not always be true. There'll obviously be great things coming out of the NHS and stuff. But actually, if you were to place your bets, I'd place them on mindings or something like that rather than something coming out of,
Yes. Well, sort of working on a paper at the moment about 50 digital technology ideas that could change social care tomorrow.
Great.
I shall keep you in touch when we publish it.
I look forward to it.
I've got a question actually from a listener, from Gary Haywood, who's @_gorilla, and he says, do users have a consistent view on innovation and trust, or is this an issue disruptors must bear in mind?
I think trust and innovation are two different things. They're obviously related. If, as an innovator, you want to get your stuff adopted, you have to create trust in two audiences, both the user and the provider. Trust is always an issue for anybody in health or social care. And so I think that's just a given. Innovation, well, if I'm going along to receive a service, is it innovative or not? I don't really mind that much. I mind that overall the service innovates, but for me personally, an individual user of Service X, it doesn't matter. Whereas, do I trust Service X? It always matters. Mm. So I think that they're different. The answers come at different levels, and trust is always. But for an innovator, to move on to that bit of it, building trust is about having a clear set of values, which I think my team, which are great at patient opinion, are much better at holding me to than I am. I tend to kind of think, oh, well, we'll do it. And they say, no, we're not doing that because it's not what we're here for. So one is about having a clear set of values. And another really, really important thing is the business model. Look at the business model that's supporting this. So that if we, patient opinion, were supported by adverts from medical negligence lawyers, which some sites in the States are, we would have a completely different business because the business model would drive it differently. If we had a lot of venture capitalists, I'm sure many more people would know about us, but we'd also have a completely different set of incentives to generate money and profit for them. And there's always trade-offs, and Patient Opinion's business model is not perfect, but look at that combination of values and business model and see how fast they're innovating. And that is a really great way to kind of pick up who you want to win and who you want to back.
That was why I asked the funding question.
But some useful insights for new social businesses wanting to enter the health and social care markets.
Hopefully.
Well, do you have any final thoughts, Paul, about the biggest challenges in making health and social care services fit for the 21st century?
Well, in terms of care opinion, it's a really important basic problem, which is that the sector often reflects its underfunded nature, and lots of people who are doing great work are on not much more than the minimum wage. And the IT services, we learnt this from the IT level of IT sophistication in care homes, as we found in the pilot, is not great. So there's a whole set of practical issues and around AIT and sort of motivational stroke moral ethical issues about how you work with a workforce which is doing great stuff often, but not under the best of financial or managerial circumstances, in order to get these hugely positive but disruptive digital innovations working well with them. That's the biggest challenge. It's a very, very practical stuff, I think.
Yes.
That's great. Well, Paul, we normally have a feature on the show called Follow Friday. So I was wondering if there was anybody that you think that we should be keeping our eye on.
Well, I'm sure you may know the first one, who's Annie Cooper, who I just really love for her sort of, she's a nurse, tweets a lot at Annie Coops, and I really like her for her interest in compassion and her upfrontness about how her professional working life interacts with her thoughts around digital media. And for somebody I really respect around the use of evidence is Margaret McCartney, who's a GP up in Glasgow.
You're very welcome.
And she tweets at Margaret McCartney, MGT McCartney, MCCCARTNAY. And she's just a real terrier about evidence. And she's big friends with Ben Goldacre. And you can see her getting into these massive Twitter fights with the great and the good. And I just love it. And the last one is at Kate B. FNP, which is Kate Billingham, who runs Family Nurse Partnership across the UK, or used to run Family Nurse Partnership across the UK, and now tweets about early years interventions and around the world, which I think is just a really, really important area that we all underestimate in health and social care.
Yes. Oh, some new ones to add to our growing list.
Absolutely, and a Scot in the mix. Always very happy to mention a good Scot there.
Thank you so much for joining us
It's been
today,
a real
Paul.
pleasure.
Make sure and follow us on our website, which is disruptivesocialcare.com, and also on Facebook, facebook.com/disruptivesocialcare. If you are tweeting, please use the hashtag DEUKcare, and do tell your friends, your communities all about us. The more people listen, the more we'll do these shows. So that's us for this week. We will catch you again soon.
Bye.